Started. So welcome to Pipeline Artist Symposium Hard Truths seminar about publishing. We did one last month about screenwriting, the hard truths of screenwriting, but you missed it. Maybe you didn't. Maybe some of you were here, but we're going to do that again. And we'll be having lots of these kinds of hard truths and town hall kind of conversations where you can participate. If you have questions during the course of this time, there's a Q&A box down at the bottom. Just click on it. There's also a chat if you want to chat amongst yourselves. We're going to try to keep an eye on everything. But so if we missed your question, we apologize in advance, but we're going to try to not miss your question. So for the next 2 hours, we're going to be talking to our panelists about everything and anything that has to do with publishing and answering any of your hard pressing questions and try not to crush your soul with our hard truths. So Ruth, do you want to start off by giving some introductions?
Absolutely. All right, everybody, welcome. There's a lot of people from all over the United States, it seems like, so I'm really excited. So many writers and have been able to tune in tonight, and we got a really great list of panelists to be able to give you guys some, I think, some wonderful information tonight. We're really excited about it. So I'm going to start with Ciara down here at the bottom of my screen. All right. She is an author and a screenwriter. She was actually born and raised in a small town, just like myself, Northwestern Connecticut. She received an MFA in screenwriting from Boston University. It's not the real BU, but I'll give you that, where she later taught undergraduate writing courses. So her debut young adult fantasy novel, Awaken, was published in fall 2021 through an independent publisher, Parliament House Press. She also works at Book Pipeline as an editor and judge for the writing contest, and we love having her at Pipeline. And we also have Mr. Peter Malone over here in our turtleneck tonight. He is the director of operations for Book Pipeline, and he does an excellent job there, and he spearheads the division of the unpublished competition specifically, which has resulted in 8 writer success stories since its launch in 2020, which is an unreal pace in just such a short amount of time. He's also a screenwriter, an author, a playwright, and Wired Shut, if you caught it, is his first feature film credit as a writer-producer. It's just about to be released on digital and video on demand November 30th, so you should absolutely check it out. It's being released by 101 Films. And last but not least, he's the proud co-host of the Pipeline Artist original podcast, This Podcast Needs a Title, and you should absolutely check that out as well.
And definitely Google Wired Shut and look at the trailer.
Oh,
it's really
please,
cool.
yes.
And it will scare you. So if you're a little timid in the horror department,
yes.
Yeah, it's a little scary. And then we also have Chantelle Aimée Osman, and she is the editor of Agora Books, an award-winning imprint focusing on socially and culturally unique crime fiction and horror from publisher Polis Books, and a professor at LIU Brooklyn Polk School of Communication, MFA in Writing and Publishing. She's also the host of Words of Prey podcast, which is incredible. All of our podcasts, if you go to pipelineartist.com/listen, they're all listed there. Reckless Creatives, Words of Prey, This Podcast Needs a Title, a lot of great guests on there as well. And she was named the Publishers Weekly Rising Star honoree in 2020. And also Ruth Sabin is Ruth and I are co-directors of Symposium, and she's an executive of Pipeline, has been here for how many years? 7
years.
7 years. And yeah. And I'm the editor-in-chief of Pipeline Artists, which you should all be going and reading because we have really great articles. So we're going to start off. Yeah. So we're going to start off because we had invited people to, when you signed up and registered, to send some questions to our panelists. So we're going to start off with your questions, but there's the Q&A box in there. So keep putting whatever new questions you have in the box so we can get them all in. We've got 2 hours, so relax, pour yourself a glass of wine. We're going to have a really nice time. So one of our first questions that came in was from a writer who lives outside of the US. And they wanted to know how to best build a network from across the pond and to find an agent and promote your work after it's been published if you're trying to connect to the US market. Chantelle, did you want to give some thoughts?
Well,
about
I think it's, if anything positive is said to come out of this global pandemic, I think it's this: the world has gotten smaller in that way. There are opportunities for conferences, opportunities to pitch agents, various pitch fests. I know Writers Digest does one that's amazing. And for example, last year Thriller Fest did theirs, and it was virtual, and we had people pitching editors and agents from all over the world. So I think the world has gotten smaller in that way. And US agents aren't only looking for US writers. And a bunch of agencies, I got an email today, as a matter of fact, that one of the agencies that I work with a lot has opened an office in Europe and is looking for people in Europe to, work with. So I think it's basically, follow the same path as you would if you were stateside, and look for an agent. And I don't think that it has to be somebody near you for all of this to work.
Yeah, I mean, what matters most is that your stuff is good. I mean, an agent's not going to turn you down because you live in France and they're a US agent. If they think that they can sell it and take it out the market and do well with it, that's not going to be a barrier. Yeah, as Chantelle said, the world has become a lot smaller since the pandemic, and that's a good thing to come out of the pandemic. I say that in air quotes, obviously.
Yeah, it's like different than if you were pursuing screenwriting.
Yes, very different.
Very different. It's like there's writers everywhere. Do you think it matters if they have an agent who's based in the US or like an agent in the UK? Do you think it matters where that agent is?
It wouldn't hurt to start querying agents that are in your native country. Like if you're a UK author, to start with looking at UK agents first, but you can do both simultaneously. It's not an issue to look for both, and it's not an issue at all.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. And I know people who, find the best fit first in the UK and they're stateside, and then eventually open up to having a US agent as well. Often you might have agents that deal with your work in various parts of the world. Like, for example, you would have a separate film agent, even if you're a novelist. So, that person would be responsible for selling your book for TV or film and would be very separate from the agent that, say, pitching your book to a big 5 publisher. So having more than one agent is also possible as well.
Yeah, and there are agents that specialize in doing nothing but foreign rights or subsidiary rights or audio rights or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of agents that specialize in a very narrow type of thing, and that's okay. And it's, as Chantelle said, yeah, we're just saying the same thing.
Like, and I've got you positioned on my Zoom, like on either side of me. So it's like stereo,
Talking right out on the other side. I like that.
And I'm looking forward to when we get to those questions when people disagree with each other, because that's allowed.
Jeanne, I actually had a good question pop here in the Q&A. You want me to throw it out there?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so I think this might be one, since you just had a book published within an independent publisher here, I think this might be a good question for you. So it says, can anyone give insight on the submission process itself? My agent put my debut narrative nonfiction on submission in mid-September. We got a few close passes, but for the last month, nothing. Is that normal or troublesome? Can you give some insight into your own process?
Yeah, for me, I had a bit of a weird experience because I currently don't have a literary agent, and I went straight to an independent publisher. So I didn't necessarily, for my book that just came out, have to go through that lengthy submission process with different publishers. However, before that, when I was agented, I did have a book out on submission. And in my experience, it was, the agent puts together a list of publishers that they think is going to be the best fit for your book, and they send it out. you know, it's sort of the same process for the most part for when you're querying agents, as agents sort of querying publishers. Obviously, they would probably have more relationships with the publishers and kind of have a better idea of what certain publishers are looking for. And it is a really lengthy process of, you know, there'll be some, even if an editor being pitched a book from an agent loves the book, they still have to ride up the ladder to all of their people in order to acquire it. So, you know, it takes a lot of voices to all agree, which is not always the easiest thing to get a book agreed upon to be purchased or put an offer in. So I wouldn't say it's a bad thing that it's taking a while. You know, I've heard so many stories of people being on submission for ages, and then a year out, a publisher buys their book and it all works out and it's great. And then there's other stories where, you know, it's the first week on submission where a book gets purchased, and that's wonderful. And then there's books that just don't sell because it's not the right timing, but that doesn't mean it's not a good book or there won't be a time for it, but it is just a lot of different factors that kind of have to match up for it to work out.
Yeah.
So
and-
we're saying don't press the panic button, essentially.
Yeah.
on
Well,
your
and
submission.
I have to interrupt on that one and say that a lot of places I know are actually pausing acquisitions right now because there are so many issues with the supply chain, paper shortages. We're focusing on the books that we've already acquired and getting them out there. And we've had to move up timelines crazy. So a lot of people have literally, and especially foreign publishers, have paused acquisitions. So I really wouldn't worry. And while Ciara was answering the question, I actually went back and looked at the last two books that I acquired and when I first started talking to the agent about them to when I acquired them. And one of them was actually in February of this year, and I just acquired it this month. And the same thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and actually I had been queried for a different book from the same author that I passed on, but really liked the writing and said, you know, send me something else. And they did, and that one ended up working out. So that's, you know, February through November. And another one, I was queried in August and just made an offer on, and thank God got it on Monday. So though, you know, that's and that one's actually faster than the normal timeline for me. So, you know, if that gives an idea of how long it can take for a yes, like people assume that just because they haven't heard it's a no, but those two were both several months and ended up being a yes, please, I will make an offer. So.
Yeah, and I've sent out, because I send out the winners of and runners up of the unpublished contest, I send them out to agents and publishers both. And I've, you know, sometimes I'll hear back a week later and sometimes I'll hear back 6 months later. It's, you know, there's no rhyme or reason as to why they don't respond immediately. So you do not press the panic button at all. No need.
Awesome.
And I do recommend following the agents and editors that you query on Twitter, because often they'll say, you know, hey, I'm through submissions as to this date, or I'm through the slush pile as to this date. So that might be the only way you might kind of get a no. So it's a good idea to just check in with them on Twitter.
And Ciara, I was curious, what made you go like the independent publishing route and without an agent?
Well, it was a few months beforehand that I parted ways with my agent because I don't want to
You don't have to tell everyone.
she wasn't cutting it for me. And basically I just went out. It was actually a Pit Dark. It was kind of like Pit Mad. It's Pit Dark, pitching one of my books. And sometimes publishers participate directly on those Twitter pitch events as well as agents, and they liked my tweet. And so I queried them. Well, I did some research first. Always make sure you do your research first. And I sent them the query. They requested the full, and I think it was like a month later, there was another, I think it was Pit Mad. I then pitched it again, and I think they saw I was pitching it again because they emailed me that day being like, we want to publish your book, like stop pitching it. And so basically, and they were a small independent publishing company, and I just really liked what they had to say. And you know, they answered all my questions and they talked through everything with me, and they really loved my book. They seemed enthusiastic about it. You could tell that they had actually read the book, which isn't always the case, and could speak in detail about it. They had a good vision for it, and I just felt really good about it. And so yeah, I just went with my gut and went that route. So it's working out so far.
I see some people popping questions in the chat. It would be
Yes.
helpful. Yeah, it would be helpful to us because there's conversations going on in there. If you can pop the questions in the Q&A box, because that just keeps it contained for us. It's a little bit easier because there's quite a few people in here. So just want to make sure so that we don't miss your question, but there's a couple in there. Before we move on to the next thing, because you brought up Twitter and pitching events on Twitter, what are some of the hashtags writers should all be following on if they're on Twitter?
I follow hashtag writing community because I just feel like whenever there's a writing tweet, you know, it's a great community to belong to. I find Twitter can sometimes be a very hostile online environment, but I find that the hashtag writing community is very supportive, uplifting. They do follow trains all the time. People will just like talk about their books or ask for advice. So I'd say that, and hashtag MWriting is one I follow too, because that's just people being like, this is what I'm doing. This is my work in progress. And I wrote this many words today. And it's sort of just nice to scroll through and see like, okay, there's other people out there doing what I'm doing, struggling with what I'm struggling with, and celebrating each other's wins and stuff. So that's
there's also like PitMad, you know, for pitching, like they do like quarterly or whatever. And is it MSWL, manuscript?
Manuscript wish list. Yeah, a lot of agents and publishers too will use that to basically say what they're looking for. A lot of times if agents reopen to queries, they'll use the manuscript, the MSWL.
We have a request, Ciara. Could you post those potentially in the chat by the end of the end of tonight, like just those little hashtags for people to copy?
Piggybacking off of that, in addition to what Chantelle and Ciara said, Manuscript Wish List, they have a website that is easy to navigate. They catalog all agents and editors' updated manuscript wish lists and when they open, etc. So it's a good idea to check that in addition to Twitter and when you're kind of gauging who to query and when and whatnot.
If you go to, I'm going to put the link in the chat box. If you go to pipelineartist.com/socialize, we have some
Erica just
we have some social media kind of and a whole bunch of hashtags for Twitter. So I'll stick that in the chat as well.
And shameless self-plug, hashtag pipeline authors.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Especially when we chat Thursday nights, which is where we would normally be tonight.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, Thursday nights from East Coast 8 to 10, 5 to 7 Pacific time. Every Thursday night on Twitter, hashtag pipeline authors. You can find us talking, and usually me burning dinner. And Peter has an awesome. He's very good with gifts. Just not gifts as in presents, but gifts as in.
Well, we'd I'm sure be open to him trying to see if he's good with gifts too.
Yeah, you know?
Yes, we would.
Tis the season.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody actually asked a question. What do you think about self-publishing a screenplay in screenplay format? Think J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
I guess my answer to that would be, can you think of another one that's not a blockbusterly famous global series that's been successful having been published that way?
Yeah, and my follow-up question would be, it's a screenplay that you've written based on something? It's an original screenplay? I'm not quite sure I understand the question, sorry.
So J.K. Rowling actually self-published the screenplay of the spin-off version, The Cursed Child or whatnot, in physical form, which was pretty cool. It was kind of following, she did it also in stage play format for Beasts, I believe, the Fantastic Beasts, which was really cool. And so that was something I think that she was allotted kind of a luxury of doing that because, as Chantelle mentioned, it was already a massive success as it was. And so I think you had the opportunity to do that and people would pick it up just because of the Harry Potter name brand. but I don't really necessarily see that happening on a regular basis, or why that would be beneficial, I think, to the novelist.
But if you're self-publishing, you can self-publish whatever you want, whether it'll be successful or not.
Oh, that's true.
If that's what you want to do, well, I don't know what people will think of it, but you know, that's one perk of self-publishing, is you really can sort of do whatever you want. You have control of it.
Yep.
Completely. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about editors.
Should I
Editors.
leave?
Like somebody
Another
asked, yeah, somebody's got the question here. How do you feel about hiring an editor for your fiction book prior to querying? So that, you know, I'm assuming they're talking about somebody to just help you pretty it up, polish it up, get it ready. But I would also like to talk about, after we get through that question, just to piggyback on the editor question, about what it's like to work with an editor, what advice you would want to give authors about the best way to work with editors. If you're, whether you're, and this would apply whether it's somebody you've hired or whether it's somebody who is the editor for the publisher, because they both have to work with you and all of that. So, I mean, I would like to reiterate what I said at the last Hard Truths, which is just don't suck. Like be a nice human being, be collaborative, all of that kind of stuff. This person is there to help you. But as Chantelle is somebody who really digs in deep with your clients and your authors, you know, what are some of the things you love about working with authors, like the things that you want your authors to do, and the thing that you would pat them on the head and be like, yay, go you, I would love to work with you again because you made it so lovely. And some of the things that made you cringe, that makes you feel like, I really, if this person came past my desk again, I'd run screaming.
I hope that nobody else wants to speak for the next hour and a half, because that's how long this is going to take me to answer. First, I would actually,
Peter.
I would like to quickly answer the first part of that question, which was the hiring like a freelance editor. I've done that as a side hustle for almost 15 years now. And I think that you don't, it's certainly not one of those things that you have to do in order to get an agent or in order to, you know, get a deal at a publishing house. You don't have to have had your work edited first. However, that being said, if it's something that you can afford, I don't think that there's a reason not to give yourself that leg up, so to speak, especially in, let's say you only do the first like 50 to 100 pages of your manuscript even, because that's what's going to get the agent or editor hooked on it. And you know, hopefully it won't be something where it's like a massive rewrite and edit and it only stops at page 50 and then it just, you know, completely tanks. But if you have the time and if you can afford it, there's no reason not to give yourself that added, you know, it's just a value add. Now, as far
Before you go on to the next part though, about how much, what's the price range that somebody
oh my God,
is
Jeanne,
reasonable to pay for such? Is there anything that's standard, like per page, per word?
Okay, so generally, I do know some people that do it like hourly, which I can't possibly do. And I've never billed that way because like, I'm like, you know, oh, look, there's a squirrel and I get distracted and that, you know, I can't possibly bill hourly. But so I generally, and most freelance editors that I know do by the word, and it can be anywhere from 2 cents a word, which is kind of like the low standard rate, to like 8 cents a word, which would be a very high, like, you know, you're dealing with an editor for, you know, with strong credentials rate. So I think if you're somewhere in that area, you're probably, you know, dealing with somebody that's decent. But prices do vary. All right, so now what I love about authors and what I hate about authors. Well, so I love everything about authors, or I wouldn't work with them. I have been very lucky, and generally I ensure that I speak at length with an author about not only what I'm going to do through the publishing company, like what they can expect, but also basic editing notes, my thoughts about the manuscript before I actually make an offer, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page from the get-go, and that I'm not going to blindside them with changes that I want to their novel, and that they're not going to be surprised with things that come from our end as well. So I have been very lucky in that I work with tremendously amazing authors. I think that the best thing that authors really can do is provide honest feedback on the edit, but also in general. Like, it's okay to say, no, I don't want to change. I am acquiring your manuscript for your voice, not my voice. That's why I write my own stuff. Like, if I want my voice, I'll go over there. So I will give opinions or suggestions, but what I really want is your better suggestion, or what really, oh, you see where I'm going with this and what stopped me, and you've got a better way to fix it than I do. That's amazing. So I like hey, no, I don't want to do it this way, but how about this? So making sure that you have an open and honest dialogue, because if you have if you're strongly against an edit, I would never force that on you. But the best things that you can do, especially if you're working with a smaller publisher, is, the things that we can't do as a publisher is really create that wonderful relationship and back and forth with readers. We can request, hey, review this, we'll do a giveaway, all of that fun stuff. But if it comes from the author, and if the author is participating and talking to their fans, that can do, so much better than anything that a publisher will put out there, because the reader really wants to get to know the author and hear what the author has to say, as opposed to the publisher. So I love authors that are very, self-starters on the marketing front, because we do so much, but there's certain things that we as a publisher really can't do that's so much better coming from the author, and making those individual relationships with fans really pays off in the long run.
That's pretty good. So
That's a good answer.
Thank you.
Being as you're an editor,
I'll just sign off now.
No, you can't go
Mic
anywhere.
drop right there.
Yeah, we still have you. Oh, that's what I forgot. I have that button that, like, that was easy.
Oh, the easy button. Yes.
Yes, I found it the other day.
Nice.
I know. So here's something else. Oh, somebody had got a request from an agent at PitMad, and they sent their book in, and it was too short. It was kind of like a novella length, and they declined it because they said it was too short. Well, now they've beefed it up. It's now the length of a book. Could they requery this agent? And so let's make that also kind of a general conversation. Like, when an agent has rejected you, is it ever appropriate to requery with the same piece of work, or do you always requery with a different piece of work?
Well, sorry, Peter, I'm just going to step all over everybody. That actually works really well with that earlier question that you asked from the audience, because they had said something like they kept getting near misses, basically. Like, it was really great feedback, but they just end up passing. And so in those situations, a no isn't always a no. Particularly if you're not getting a standard form letter rejection, and you can kind of tell what those are. So if you're getting feedback, if you're getting close, if you're getting, please, I think and an agent or an editor can always say, no, I don't have time to respond. And there's no harm, no foul. But it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to go back and say, okay, so something about this connected with you. Where did I lose you? Could I get a little bit more feedback, and then do an R&R, which is a revise and resubmit? Like, if you liked it enough, if I change it, will you read it again? And I do this a bunch, because I'll be like, I really liked this concept. I don't think it's fleshed out enough. Here are, 2 or 3 points that I think you might want to look at. if you ever decide to revise, please feel free to resubmit. So a no is sometimes an opportunity, I think, to make your work better. So sorry, Peter, your turn.
No, it's okay. I was just, honestly, I was going to say something similar, but it is just to add on to that. It is important to kind of read the room on the email that they sent. I mean, not everybody's going to be as kind as Chantelle is and give you a bunch of notes and long feedback and say, please do this and then resubmit it. A lot of people just say, thanks, didn't do it for me. You know, they'll say it nicer than that. But if that's the kind of response you get, then no, you probably can't query them again with that. So that's why it's really important to get a lot of feedback before you submit something, because think of it this way, you get one shot with these people. These people have so many things to read. Why should they read yours when they have 6,000 other manuscripts that they could read? Make sure it is in the absolute best shape it can possibly be before you send it in.
Ciara, I'm curious, how many agents did you query before you got your prior agent?
A lot. And I wouldn't recommend it because, you know, I wrote a book. It probably wasn't ready to go out just yet, but I was an eager beaver and I was like, it's good enough, you know, they'll work with me on it. And I made my Excel spreadsheet of all my top agents, and you know, a lot of them came back and said thanks, but no thanks. Some just didn't reply. And I, you know, kept doing different rounds until I got to the point where I was like, all right, well, let me just see what agents are actually taking writers right now. And they could be agents I never heard of at agencies that I'd never heard of or didn't have that many big titles. And I was like, it doesn't matter. I just need the agent. I just need the agent. And that was sort of what happened. And that was the agent I got. And it wasn't a positive experience for me. So, you know, if you go through querying and your top agents say no and your secondary agents say no, maybe it's time to reevaluate your manuscript and rework it before you send it out again, or just shelve it and move on and work on something else, especially if you have your heart set on a specific agent or a specific agency who you already kind of blew your shot with a certain manuscript. So going forward, I actually, with Peter, working through Book Pipeline, had an offer of another agent, and I talked with her and I just knew it was not a fit. She wanted to represent me and I did not want to go through what I went through again. So it was difficult, but I had to say no. You know, I know kind of the working relationship I want. And so don't settle, even though getting the agent seems like the end goal. There's so much that comes after that you really want to set yourself up well.
Yeah, and Ciara was really wise about that, because from what she told me about this conversation, it wouldn't have been the right fit at all. Do not feel like you need to fall in love with the first agent that shows you appreciation or wants to represent you. That maybe it'll work out, maybe it'll be great, maybe they are the perfect fit, but don't feel obligated to say, oh, I got an agent to say yes, okay, great, let's go. You know, take your time, do your research, query other people. You know, it is a long-term relationship. You need to look at it that way. I know it's cliche to say, but it's true.
No, it's very, very true. And I think that's saying no is one of the smartest things that you can possibly do, because it's better to have no agent than it is to have the wrong agent, especially your first time out. And you need an agent, because think about it. And the other thing that you said before, Peter, I think goes to this, and it was really brilliant. It's like, you need to make sure that the only reason that somebody is passing on your work is because they weren't just crazy over the moon passionate about it that day. And there shouldn't be anything else that they can kick it out for. There shouldn't be, you know, misspellings, bad formatting, wrong way to submit, like everything else needs to be perfect. And then you have to think about the fact that you're building your team, and hopefully that agent will be your agent for, you know, 20 years or 20 books. And sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not, but you want that person who is going to be your cheerleader and your advocate. And if you're not comfortable with that person, if you don't think they got your book, if you don't think that they read your book, which has happened to me, I'm on agent number 3 myself. I have a brilliant one now, but I've gone through the process the hard way too. And you want to make sure that it's somebody that you can be honest with, can talk about your long-term goals with, and also like has the relationships in your genre to be able to be the best advocate for you, because it might be, you know, somebody who only has dealt with, I don't know, cookbooks, really loves your mystery novel, and they might be super passionate about it, but if they don't have those connections in the industry, there's not necessarily a huge reason then to have that agent on your team. So you have to think about it really more from a business, and you're hiring a team member, more than, you know, that emotional place, which is really hard to separate when it comes down to your work.
Yeah, that's so true. Thank you, Chantelle, for saying that. 1000% true. It's something that's really important. If you guys don't, you should subscribe to Publishers Marketplace. That tracks all of the deals that are going on in the publishing industry. It looks at who is selling in what genres and what age categories, et cetera. I mean, that is an easy way to collate, okay, this agent's selling a lot of thrillers right now. This agent's selling a lot of cookbooks right now. So that is a resource that I highly recommend, to speaking to what Chantelle is saying. Yeah.
What are some of the other resources that people should be looking into?
I think
You know, to
Query
find
Tracker is really helpful.
Query Tracker?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're going through the query process, you know, it has all the data on agents who are acquiring, and it's same for like some smaller publishers or independent publishers are on there too. And you can sort of just collect all your progress and who requests, who doesn't request, and you just have it all in one spot. So I recommend that.
Track your queries.
Yeah.
And also, honestly, just Google and ask, you know, hopefully all of you belong to some sort of writing group or organization, even if it's not something that you're particularly active with. I mean, there's like, you know, Romance Writers of America, Horror Writers of America, Sisters in Crime, Mystery Writers of America. We can keep going. Or, you know, your local, wherever it is, you know, whatever, Arizona Writers Group, and talk to those people about people that you're looking to use, whether it's a freelance editor or an agent or whatever, or a, you know, marketing or PR person, and talk to these national groups too. And honestly, just Google the names and see if good things come up or if bad things come up. You know, doing your research, it's very, very easy to take advantage of people who don't know what they're really looking for. So, you know, making sure that you protect yourself and are dealing with somebody who actually has credentials. And that goes for agents too, because fortunately or unfortunately, this is a profession where you don't need a particular set of credentials to be a part of it. You know, there's no licensing exam to be an agent, or continuing education that you have to do every year to be an editor. So anybody can just go, hey, I've decided to be an agent today. And people unfortunately do that. So, you know, Googling, seeing what other clients people have, that can serve you really well in the long run, because it's unfortunately far too easy to take advantage of people in these scenarios.
I would
You
also
never
look
pay
at
for an agent. Sorry.
Oh, yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah, never pay for an agent.
Oh God, no.
They get paid when you get paid. That's how that should
Yeah.
work.
And the same thing ought to go for if you're submitting to a publisher, you know, directly. You know, there really should not be reading fees unless you're applying to some sort of contest. There should not be a fee involved in anything that you're doing up front, other than, of course, if you hire a freelance editor, you'll want to pay them, or a marketing person. But, you know, generally you do not pay your agent until they make you a deal. And, you know, you definitely are not paying your publisher.
When in talking about that, can we just switch over a little bit to hybrid press? Because there is payment involved, and how one would find, if they decide they want to do that, instead of going the traditional publishing route, they don't really want to do self-publish because they don't know how. They want this, what they feel is a happy medium of paying a press to publish them, which is basically you're paying for the editing services, the book cover, whatever, as opposed to the publisher paying for that. And the things too, because there probably are a lot of companies that do that are scammy, but there are some, like She Writes, that are reputable. So I'm not sure if any of our listeners are interested in that concept.
Hybrid publishing.
Yeah, the hybrid publishing, but does anybody here have any knowledge, understanding, experience with that?
I don't really, but I think that the key is knowing that that's what you're getting into. I know that, Ciara, we talked a little bit about self-publishing earlier, which is absolutely, you know, there are as many authors out there, there is a right path for you. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody ought to be published by a big five or everybody ought to self-publish. I mean, there are reasons that self-publishing is right for a lot of people. But that being said, there is a lot involved. I honestly, I'm jealous of anybody who would take that on because they have to be their own editor or find somebody who will be. They have to, you know, you have to do all the jobs that a writer and a publisher have to do all at once. And that's a lot of work, and the marketing, because generally, unless you have a built-in audience, you also have to grow your audience. So it's just a really, really hard proposition. And the other thing that I always like to tell people about self-publishing is that you can always, that's always there. That's always on the back burner, but you generally can't go the other way. So like, and it's happened with me and my freelance clients. I've seen people who are just so, they're so eager to see their book out there. And I'll say, oh, this is a great book. And I think you've got really a chance for a major publisher. And they're too impatient. And they worked so long and it took them so long to write it. And they just want it out there. And then I'll get an email about 6 months later that goes, you know what, maybe you were right and I should have tried for a bigger publisher. How do I do that? And I'm like, it's too late now. Because a lot of times a major publisher won't look at something that's already been self-published. So realize that you can always self-publish, but you can't go the opposite direction. Regarding the hybrid collaborative publishers, or if you want to call them honestly vanity presses, that's basically taking the self-publishing route and not having to do all of it yourself. They're going to have people that can edit and they're going to have people that can do covers. So it's taking a few of those jobs off of your plate. But I want to make sure that everybody understands that that's what they're getting into. I have unfortunately had, you know, I'll go to a conference and I'll come back the next year and I'll have somebody run up and go, oh, I'm so excited. I wanted to let you know I got a publishing deal. And it only cost me $10,000. And they don't realize because they haven't done a lot of research. And it's really not the author being, you know, dense. It's the fact that it's a business that they're not familiar with. So they don't know what's wrong or right until they find that stuff out the hard way, which is why I say do your research. Because, you know, honestly, if you weren't in publishing, would you know how, you know, John Grisham gets in the airport? It's perfectly reasonable to think he spent 15 grand to make that happen. He didn't, you know, that's what the publisher does. But, you know, knowing what self-publishing means, knowing what a vanity press is. And that's why even honestly, just asking questions. If somebody says, hey, I want to publish you, ask questions like, where will my book be? You know, do you have distribution? The number of people, again, who are excited that their book is published and then they go to a bookstore and it's not there and they find out that it's, you know, only ebook, or they don't have distribution to major stores. You know, these are things that you don't know to ask until you don't know what you don't know. So just making sure you know, if it's a vanity press, what you're getting into.
So let's talk about like questions to ask. Somebody in the Q&A has a question for Ciara saying, what were some of the questions you asked when feeling out your independent publisher, and what aspects were particularly important to you and why? And also to kind of follow that up with just basic general questions you should be asking during that that acquisition process where an agent brings you to an editor at a publishing house and that editor interviews you, and all that kind of stuff, the kind of questions you should be mindful of.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely asked the distribution question, you know, like, where am I going to see my books? What is your kind of business model? Especially in my experience, it was an independent publisher. So I wasn't too familiar with how they work versus, you know, the big five traditional publishers. And so I asked my questions about how the indie publisher kind of goes about things, and even asking things about how much will I get paid? That's something you should definitely ask, because it'll be in a contract if you get to that stage. But, Parliament Press explained to me what their cut was, what my cut was. And, I made sure I did my research and talked to other people with similar experiences to make sure I wasn't getting gypped or anything like that. I asked about marketing because I knew I would probably have to do a lot of that because it's a smaller independent publishing company. They don't have the resources that some bigger publishing companies have. And so they answered on what they kind of were planning for my book versus what I would sort of have to shoulder myself. I asked about timeline, which I think is really important because I had talked to other small publishing houses too, and they were saying like, oh, we'll get your book on the shelves in 5 years' time. And I know that publishing is very slow, but 5 years was like, excuse me, 5 years? Like, that's a lot. And so, I asked about the timeline and not just like, when would my book be out, but like, what would the editing process look like? Basically, I just really wanted a picture of how everything would roll out, what my responsibilities would be, what their responsibilities would be. Yeah, and I'm sure there's some other questions I'm forgetting at the moment, but I think, the timeline, the payment, marketing were, big questions that I really needed answers to.
That makes sense. I'd be asking those questions too.
There's an interesting question in here. I was curious about this myself, and it's a quick one, but is there room for like for essay collections? Like, do agents pick up essay collections, or is it just simply like individual essay publishing, like online, your only option in that direction? Or are there actually agents who specialize in that particular category?
Are we talking about like a full length collection of stories, or like a
yeah, it would be like a collection of like, say, humorous essays. What was it?
The answer is yes. There are agents out there that are going to look at those, but there are not a lot of them. Look at it from their standpoint. Those, realistically speaking, don't sell for a lot, and they're not going to make a lot of money on those.
So it's a bit more niche.
It is much more niche. Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that they're not out there, but they're slim. Yeah.
Okay, so
Gotcha.
Chantelle, you were talking about once somebody self-publishes, it's hard to go the other way. Do you mean ever go the other way, or just with that book?
With that book or that series. It's also, I mean, unless you have a 50 Shades of Grey situation where, it just takes off to an extent that a major publisher is going to pick it up and want to reprint it and print the sequels. But that's a 1 in a more than a million. Yeah, a billion chance. So especially if you have a series and if you self-publish that first one, you're likely going to have to self-publish all of the books in that series if that's the way you want to go. But that being said, I've published standalones by authors who have had a great track record with self-publishing other books of theirs. And especially for a smaller publisher, that can be a good thing because they have a built-in readership and also a reach that I might not have, or an audience that I might not be able to tap. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to have self-published books and then go the traditional route. But that being said, it does have to be, if you're going to mention it to your agent or editor, it's going to have to be a track record that is not inconsiderable. If you sold 100 copies, I would probably leave it out of my query letter. If you sold 10,000 copies, 10,000,
10,000.
5,000 I'll even give you. That's worth adding in there. That's showing me that you have a reach and it's beyond, your family and the people at your office have bought copies. So yeah, otherwise I'd kind of not say anything about it.
So what about the other way? There was somebody who asked us a question prior, who went during registration, put a question in asking that they had a book of a series, the first book of the series, traditionally published, And then that publisher did not want to pick up the second book in the series. And so she wants to, or she or he, I can't remember, they want to publish the rest of their series. So they're thinking about self-publishing the rest of their series. I'm assuming the publisher, she didn't go into detail. I'm assuming the publisher owns the rights to the first. I mean, how hard is it if she wanted to try to get her rights back?
You know, it actually happens quite a bit. And I'm doing a totally shameless plug for my friend here. My friend Kelly Garrett, whose new standalone Like a Sister will be out in March. She had a very multiple award-winning series, the Detective by Day mysteries, that were more of a cozy traditional, and this new one is very much more of a thriller. But she had published those to great acclaim, and she got the rights back after the publisher folded, and she got new covers for them, and they look great, and they're re-releasing on December 6th. So, you know, not every publisher will be amenable to giving the rights back, but if you do have, I can think of a myriad of examples, particularly in the mystery field, where a publisher either has folded or just doesn't want to continue the series, but there's enough of a readership there that it's worth going ahead and doing the self-publishing route. And honestly, that's a scenario where I highly recommend it, because not a lot of publishers will pick up something else in a series, especially a publisher like, for example, my size, because, you know, if you had been published by Berkeley or had been published by Simon & Schuster, or, you know, something with a very strong marketing machine behind you, and that series didn't really take off, there's not a lot more that we can bring to a table for that existing thing. So it really does work well, because you've got fans and a demand for, you know, book 2, book 3, whatever it is. So I think self-publishing in that scenario is a really good idea, and there's no harm in asking for the rights back.
You can't,
Awesome.
you can't get the yes unless you ask the question.
Exactly.
True. Jeannie, I had a quick question for Peter over here off of his service. There was somebody who said that they went through your editing process, Peter, on Book Pipeline, I believe, and I think you passed on their debut novel, and they said that they needed to cut down by 10,000 words, and they were wondering if it was okay to resubmit again to your service after it's revised.
So did they submit to the contest, to the workshop? What did they submit?
I don't know. It just says they went through your editing service.
Okay, so probably the workshop. Yeah, I mean, we're not a publisher or an agency, so yeah, if you want to cut back on the words and then send it back in, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. And I also had a question really quickly for, let me see, where is it? On an independent publisher question. Ciara, maybe you can give some insight into this one. Let me pull it up really quickly. It says, I'm working with an indie cooperative publisher, but the process is very slow. They are well-intentioned, but still learning all the processes involved. I have been staying with it, but should I maybe query elsewhere or just trust the process? Is that one of those hybrid situations as well that we were talking about earlier?
I mean, I'm not quite sure what indie cooperative.
Yeah,
I don't know either, to be honest.
indie cooperative.
I think if you haven't, for me, like when I decided to go with them, I had to sign a contract. And so I wouldn't be able to query that project elsewhere. So if you haven't signed a contract with them and you're not happy or you don't feel comfortable with working with them, unless you signed anything, I don't see why you can't query it elsewhere. I think as a professional courtesy, you should express your concerns or just communicate with them and let them know kind of what you're thinking, what your expectations were. If they're not being met, if there's any way you guys can work it out. But obviously if it doesn't feel like a good situation and you feel like they're dragging their feet or they might be not taking your work as seriously as you need to be taking it, it's always so important to advocate for yourself as an author as well.
You are your greatest advocate in the process from beginning to end.
We're getting quite a few questions about platform, the importance of platform, how important platform is compared to the quality of your work. Do they care about how many Twitter followers you have? Who wants to speak about platform?
I'll take it first. So yes, for better or for worse, platform is very important nowadays, especially for nonfiction. There have been a lot of people that I've sent out that are nonfiction authors that I'll get a response from an agent or a publisher that'll say, we really like the writing, the story's super compelling, but there's not a built-in platform here, so we can't do anything with this. It's an unfortunate reality. It's true that platform is important for fiction as well, but I'd say it tips a little bit more in nonfiction. I think that could be the thing that pushes you over the edge in nonfiction more so than fiction. At least that's what I've seen when submitting to agents and publishers.
Well, Peter, I think we found our happy medium. You handle all the nonfiction because I have no idea. So that was the perfect answer to that. For me, I'll just basically tell you what, if I were teaching a class on pitching and querying, your last paragraph of your query letter is what I call the about me paragraph. And it's a paragraph that I personally love, but doesn't necessarily have to be in the letter. And there are three things that can be in that paragraph. One is what makes you a professional writer, whether you've published a bunch of nonfiction articles and were a journalist, or you are running a local writing conference, or you have an English degree, whatever makes you a professional writer would go in there. Secondly, anything that makes you an expert on the topic that you're writing about. So, you just wrote a serial killer book and you happen to be a serial killer. This would be, you have knowledge on this subject.
You'd like to kill agents.
And the last thing, or even if it's set somewhere, the book is set in Spain and you lived in Spain for 20 years, something that makes you an expert even tenuously on the subject matter of the book you're pitching. And then the last thing is basically anything that makes you independently marketable. So, you won a gold medal at the Olympics. You climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with Johnny Cash. You have 10,000 Twitter followers. Anything that if I set up an interview for you, you're going to have something interesting to talk about other than the book itself. And all of these things to me, they're not necessary. If you don't have any of these three, that's also fine, because I am judging, your submission mostly based on the pages that you send me and how good the book is. But those are all value adds to agents or publishers. So, if you don't have them, fine. But if you have these value adds, it really helps with that establishment of a platform. And if you're going for smaller publishing companies or more independent publishers, that's even more helpful because they have less, they don't have a whole room of marketing people. Whereas, if you have a major publisher and you don't have any of those things, they can help you develop a marketing presence at that point. But so those are all value add that platform.
And in terms of if I can just add one thing to what I said earlier, in terms of the two subgenres of nonfiction that I'm frequently seeing agents and editors pass on things for not having a big enough platform is memoir and prescriptive nonfiction. Those are the two areas where I'm noticing the trend is that platform is very, very important, and it can kind of be a deal breaker on whether or not they take on a project or not, for what it's worth.
So you touched upon query, the final paragraph of a query letter. I'm not sure, Ruth, have anybody been asking questions about query letters? Because
a little bit actually in here. There's a lot of kind of nuanced questions regarding querying. I think a lot of our audience actually might be near that querying process. So I think we're going to kind of pull it back from maybe the 60,000 foot level that Chantelle's over our heads with right now. I'm joking, and bring it into the query process. So first off, big question here is, how in shape does your manuscript have to be before submitting to an agent? I mean, I know we talked about an editor before, and there's this idea of potentially, an agent working with you on your manuscript, but, you know, like how good does it have to be? How perfect is perfect, you know, when submitting to an agent?
It needs to be in the best possible shape it could possibly be. There are agents that are more developmental and will do a bunch of drafts before they send something out, but not all of them do that. And especially if you're a person that doesn't have a track record, why should they trust that you'll be able to do draft upon draft upon draft and that they'll be able to get it out of you? Make sure it's the absolute best it can possibly be before you send it in. That makes sense.
Especially if you're looking at it. Sorry, if
No,
you're
please.
looking at it from the agent's perspective, who they have a whole docket of clients, and so they want to take on books that are ready to go that they don't have to put that much work into. Because if they took on every book that they were like, wow, this is really good, but it's going to require a lot of my attention, a lot of my work, they did that for every client they had, they wouldn't sleep. So you want to make the agent's job as easy as possible as well.
And again, they don't get paid until you get paid. So I mean, if they need to work on something for 8 months before it's ready to go out, then they're probably going to pass, because why would they not, from their perspective?
Okay.
You know?
Okay. And what are your thoughts about submitting, like pitching 2 manuscripts at once, querying 2 manuscripts at once?
One.
Well, I think there needs to be a caveat there.
In my opinion.
Well, no, it's really, I agree with you that it needs to be one per agent, but if you, yes, I wouldn't pitch 2 manuscripts in one query letter, if that's the question. But if the question is, I've got like I don't know, a cookbook and a sci-fi, and can I pitch those? They're likely going to different agents anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
So in that case, yes, that doesn't matter. I wasn't sure where that question was going.
Yeah.
What about submitting, like pitching it to 2 different like publishers, like 2 different manuscripts, 2 different publishers? Is there any example of, say, you know, in the unlikeliest of places, if both manuscripts were picked up, say, by separate publishers, if there would be any kind of coordination between publishers on launching books around the same time period? Is there anything that's like ever happened that you know
I
of?
can tell you that contractually, whoever that person signs with first is going to have some sort of clause, especially if it's in a similar vein.
Prior works.
Well, not prior works, but it'll be like, for example, in our contract, I think it's a year on either end of pub date. You're not allowed to, you know, contract with a different publisher with a basically competing book. And it's really not, it's not really even competing for sales, because especially if they're slightly different, it's not going to matter. Your fan is your fan. It's actually more important as far as blurbs and reviews go. So, you know, generally, if you've got 2 books publishing within like 3 months by the same author and in basically the same vein, Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, Book List, keep going, they're probably only going to review one of those books. And so you're competing against yourself, basically. So there's going to be some sort of moratorium for like, it's going to be X number of months on either side of one book being published before a second one can. So if they're related books, it would be better to go with the same publisher, if at all possible, to arrange a better schedule.
So we're about halfway through. This is probably a good time to take a 5-minute break. And when we come back, I'd love to talk a little bit about specifics about what makes a really great query letter, because that's what we're going to grab that agent with. So we can all mute, turn our cameras off, take 5 minutes, and I'm going to set my alarm so I don't forget. And we'll see you in 5.
See you in 5.
Done. Great. Hey. So there we go. There's everybody. Okay, so their query letters. I don't know if everybody's back yet. Y'all back?
Yeah, and there are some questions in the Q&A about query letters, by the way.
Yep. So queries are a big thing. And I know Chantelle has thoughts on this for sure. And which is why we have her here, because we love her thoughts, and she has many. I also want to share with you guys, there's a podcast I started listening to. It's called The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. And it's so good. And if you are looking for query letter advice, they start off every episode going over the query, and then the first, Ciara, what is it, 5,000 words or something of the author's
Like the
work?
first chapter or something.
Yeah. And there's two agents, same two agents every podcast. They do such a great job, and it really gives you insight into their minds when they're reading these things. And so how to make yours pop, and highly, highly recommend the podcast. And they're also fun. It's just a fun podcast. And who doesn't want to listen to a podcast with that title?
There you go.
As soon as I saw it come up, I was like, ding, 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 ding.
I'm pretty sure there's like a roll of toilet paper for the poster.
It's so good. So let's talk about query letters. I know, like, you know, we have a query letter critique service at our workshops on Book Pipeline, but so Chantelle, when somebody's querying you, and you must get who knows how many queries, and all agents get, you hear a range of how many they get per month, you know, and also to FYI on Twitter, oftentimes if you follow agents on Twitter, they'll have right in their bio, like, not accepting queries, or submission box is closed, or submission box is open, or whatever. So always look to find them on Twitter as an extra way of figuring out when it's a good time to query them. But what are some of the things that make a query pop for you, Chantelle?
Oh, perfumed letterhead. No,
Snail mail, a fax machine.
yeah, no, if you could have it delivered by singing telegram,
with a case of wine.
yes, no, well,
There
in
you
that
go.
case, then you've got it.
There you go.
No, I think this is not a scenario where you want to reinvent the wheel. You want to follow a basic format, which I already told you, the third paragraph, or basically the third paragraph, last paragraph of your query letter, ought to be the about you part of the letter. The first thing that you want to tell us is your title, your genre, and your word count, with a like one sentence teaser or tagline. And you know, there are a million different formats for query letters, and you can Google, like, you know, how Stephen King got his first agent or whatever, and every letter is going to be different. The way that I teach this is basically the least offensive format, where it's going to work for everybody and there's not going to be a problem. And the things being like the genre and the word count being upfront are so that if you're querying an agent and your word count is way low or way high, they'll notice that immediately. Or if it's a genre that they don't represent, now they don't have to read that query letter. And then your next two paragraphs are basically your mini synopsis. And then your last paragraph is that about you paragraph. And that's, you know, it's really formulaic, and you want to keep it that way. The most important thing, and I know that there was a question about the synopsis too in the chat, but so kind of doing double duty with this answer, I know that the hardest thing for a writer to write is whether it's a full page synopsis or just the mini synopsis that goes in a query letter. And the best advice that I can give for that, because this is the information we really need, is what the story is about. I want you to pretend that you read your own book the night before and it kept you up all night because it was so good. And you're talking to a friend the next morning and they say, well, why do you look so tired? And you say, I was up all night reading this great book. And they say, what's it about? And then you tell them briefly the story. And that's basically how you make sure you're only telling the most important parts of the story and not the side, the side plots and the, characters that aren't really relevant for, the immediate informational need. So make sure that it's not a list of facts and that you're actually telling a compelling story in those paragraphs, so that we then go, oh, this sounds great, let's move on to the synopsis, or let's move on to the first page of the actual manuscript. So make sure your passion comes through. That's the number one thing that you can do in a query letter to get my attention.
And, when you get a query in the inbox, if it's like this super long,
like I said, this is why, if you follow the basic standard, It shouldn't end up being more than 1 page. And that gives me all of the information I need because, for example, it's really honestly in the querying process, it's as much about efficiency to the person that you're querying as it is the content. So for example, having your genre and word count in the final paragraph, I had to read that whole letter before I got to the fact that I don't publish that genre, or you've written a cozy mystery that's 200,000 words, or that there's something else that would cause me to kick it out of the pile. And unfortunately, when agents and editors get 50 to 500 of these things a day, it's not so much that we're not willing to read all of them. It's that we literally physically cannot. We don't have that kind of time when you're already handling X number of books that you've got to be published or that you're trying to send out if you're an agent. And so you have to kick these letters out for a reason. So things like that, we want to know up front that this is right for us or not right for us, and then we'll keep reading. And like Peter said, and like I said, you only want somebody to kick something out because they're not super passionate about your writing. And not because the query letter was 5 pages long, or the synopsis didn't make any sense, or the first page was formatted and weirdly and written in Comic Sans. Like, we have to, it's not, some of us are assholes, yes, but we're really not trying to be. So these things are just like, if you get 50 or 500 a day, you can't physically read them all. So there have to be reasons that you give to say, I'm not going to pursue this one further. And so if, the query letter is addressed to the wrong person or 17 pages long, I'm probably going to kick that one out before I even get to, and it could have been the most brilliant manuscript in the world. But like I said, you don't want that reason to kick it out unless it's just really not right for the person.
And the more time they're spending reading queries, they're not working on their client's work, which can
Exactly.
make money. It's all about the, they need to eat too.
Mm-hmm.
So question here from Mr. Matt Mistich. How much do publishers really market your book? And is most of it amongst the small presses? Like when you're working with a small press, like how much of it all about marketing lays back on the author themselves to do?
I'll jump in here with my experience. When Parliament House said they wanted to publish my book, they were very upfront, being like, we'll do as much as we can. These are some things we have planned, but anything you can do as well can help. So they weren't telling me I needed to reach a certain amount of followers or I needed to post a certain amount of days. They were basically saying, the more marketing you can do and the more of an audience you can build, the better your book will perform. And I think that goes for smaller presses, larger presses.
Did they give you ideas of things to do?
Oh, they were definitely pointing me in the right direction. I was not on TikTok and they wanted me to go on TikTok, which I wasn't a fan of, but I'm there now. So say la vie. And a couple other things too. They gave me different, ideas of what to post about. They had different documents and, their templates that they would send you for ideas. They obviously don't want to tell you exactly what to post because then it doesn't come off as authentic or anything like that. But, they definitely gave ideas on how you can market your book. And then they had their own ideas of things they wanted to do on their side, which were things that I wouldn't really have the capabilities to do or the relationships that they did to do. So yeah, I think it was probably, in my experience, they were like 60% marketing and I was like 40%. So and for me, it was mostly social media. And it's as much as you want to make of it. So I could have done more, I could have done less. It's really how much time you have to, because then there's also writers who, I'm one of them, who worked full-time jobs and also was promoting a book at the same time. So if I didn't have that full-time job at the time, I probably could have done more with my book. So, if you don't have the capacity to promote yourself, maybe trying to get into a larger publishing house would be a better idea. But then with that, you still have to do promo that they set up for you and they do the legwork for. So there's always going to be a certain number of marketing or promotional things that the author has to do either way, because you want your book published, you gotta, get it out there.
And just to add on to that, just because even if you publish with a big five house, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be gun-ho, gunslinging you marketing-wise. There's still a lot that you're going to have to do on your own to supplement what they do. Sometimes they'll do a lot, and sometimes they'll do very little. Most of the time with like people like Macmillan or Simon & Schuster or HarperCollins, if you sell a lot and you're like a marquee writer, they're going to push you down everybody's throats. But if you're a mid-list writer, they're not going to do as much. So just don't make the mistake of assuming that just because you are publishing with HarperCollins that they're going to send your book everywhere. Put in the work yourself too.
And so, Chantelle, what are some of the marketing stuff that you guys do and that you encourage your writers to do?
Well, it's kind of like I was talking about before, Jeannie. Like there are things that we can do. We get reviews in the New York Times, the LA Book Review, NPR, all of the major, periodicals, magazines, trade reviews, that sort of thing. We're good at that, and we know how to do that. What we're not as great at, that we try, but we can't do, like I said, is having that personal touch with fans and readers that an author can do. So, creating a online, persona and being not necessarily, I mean, it doesn't have to be a 24/7 job, nor should it, but, being interactive with readers is great. And like I said, they'd rather hear from you as the writer than me as the editor or the publisher. Also, one of the things that I love, and this is why, especially with my publishing house, it's a very symbiotic relationship. I like to find out the audience that I might not have thought of that would buy this book. Like, for example, one of my, and she's an amazing dynamic author, Tori Eldridge. She's written the Lily Wong series, which is a series of thrillers that's kind of like Kill Bill meets Stephanie Plum. It's a woman who is a modern day ninja who helps women who are in abusive situations, basically find shelters, etc. But she's got this quirky family, blah, blah. It's very fun. Anyway, we know all of the bloggers, the reviewers, the, bookstores that would put that in the front window. But Tori and I work together because she's also actually a modern day ninja. Like she's got black belts and it's ridiculous. But she knows all of these like dojos and martial arts magazines and that sort of thing, that is an audience that might not stumble into a mystery bookstore or might not be subscribing to, a mystery blog or, but it's definitely an audience that would pick up the book. So finding, podcasts, stores, magazines, newsletters, blogs that talk about, martial arts is something where that's how a smaller book can get in front of a mainstream audience when you're thinking beyond that just standard, let's just put this in mystery bookstores and mystery blogs and we're done. So, trying to work together and figuring out what that value add audience is really something that an author can bring to the table.
Yeah. And I like that alternate ways of thinking of what is the subject matter of the book and where is my reader, what are they listening to, what are they reading? That makes a lot of sense. And that holds true to self-published authors, figuring out, because you've got to do it all yourself. So somebody was asking about suggestions for marketing agencies. I mean, obviously we don't know specific marketing agencies, but there are probably some that do work with authors better than others. And I would just recommend, again, Google, research, whatever, see if I wouldn't hire an agency to help me that didn't understand the book world, and readers. And
that's very wise and very key, because a book is an animal unlike any other type of marketing. Like, somebody can be amazing at marketing a clothing line and that does not translate over to marketing a book. And another thing is that I think also to know where your weakness is. Like, for example, I have advised authors who are not great on social media to find a marketing company if they're looking for one that, really helps them build their online platform. But there are things, and honestly, that just don't move the needle that a lot of marketing companies sell as moving the needle. Like, Bookstagram is great, but we have never seen it translate into particular sales. Like if there's suddenly, a well-known bookstagrammer has, one of our books there, we're not noticing a sudden uptick in the sales. And it's great to get those things in front of people, but a lot of this sort of thing doesn't, like I said, doesn't translate to a sale. So you want to make sure that you coordinate with your publisher if you're having, considering hiring a marketing company, and making sure that you're not retreading the same ground, because that happened to me last week, where fortunately I had an author ask me and said, here's the 5-point plan from my marketing company. And I was like, we've already done, 4 of these things. You might want to focus on 5 and, talk about this. So you want to make sure that there's always communication and coordination.
Somebody was asking if they posted an excerpt from their book online, if that would hurt, and like say the excerpt like went viral and it was really great. Like do these things, just posting a little portion of your manuscript publicly prior to getting an agent and all of that stuff, hurt you or help you? Or neither?
Well, I really strongly felt Peter was going to jump in. I sensed, and then I guess I was wrong. So I think, yeah, he might be. He's jumping in as we speak, and just mentally, I'll speak for him.
Either that or he's not. Oh, he's back.
He's back.
Oh, there he is. Oh, I think he froze for a second. There we go.
Hands up, everyone.
Those cops that were down the street have come for him.
Oh, there you go.
All right, so I will answer this in the interim. What even was the question at this point, Jeannie? I think he's unfrozen.
I forgot.
Posting an excerpt online about their book, does it hurt or help?
Posting an excerpt.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, I don't necessarily, and unless you have some sort of weird guarantee that it is going to go viral, I don't necessarily see a positive to that. If you're posting a very small amount of it, I suppose that's fine. You don't want to post so much where it's like a publisher might feel that it's already been out there. And the thing is that an agent or an editor at a publishing company wants their book to be the first time that readers see this stuff. So the more content that's out there already, the less novel it is. So, I mean, I don't really see the big bonus in putting that out there. Peter?
Am I still frozen, or can you guys?
No,
we
can
you
now
are.
see you. Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's a hindrance, but I wouldn't say it's a big bonus either. The thing that I would say is that if you are going to do that, don't have it be any more than a chapter or 2 max. Any more than that, and you are kind of starting to tread on some unsteady ground. But a chapter or 2 is okay, I think. Yeah.
So, somebody has a question, and I was thinking the same thing. When we're talking about query letters prior, how important are comp titles, and what would your recommendations be about that?
Mm-hmm.
If one would use
so
a
I have
guidelines.
very strong feelings about this.
Of course you do.
Of course I have strong feelings about everything, but
She's conflicted.
Actually, part of my strong feelings come from my background in Hollywood. And the fact that it's very incestuous there, and you never know when you raise an actor's name or a comp title there, it might be something that somebody worked on and it was a good experience or bad experience, or they passed on something that ended up being really great. And so by putting comp titles out there, you don't know what reaction that the person emotionally could be having to that comp title. That being said, I have a workaround, which is if like you're querying an agent or something like that, I suggest trying to make a comp title of one of the other works that they already represent. So, you know, and honestly, that's my number one tip in how to find an agent too. Like, figure out what books are kind of similar to yours, because at the end of the day, we're all readers. A writer is writing the book they want to read. An agent is representing the book that they read and loved. An editor wants to put it out there. So we're all readers. And you'll notice that agents kind of represent similar works, and editors publish similar work. So if you can find that thing that's kind of like you, and look even in the back of the book, and they'll thank their agent and be like, oh, this might be the right agent for me to query. And then just be, you know, very gracious about it and be like, you know, I loved X book, and it would be thrilled, you know, I would be thrilled to be considered by the agent that represents that book, which I think is kind of similar to mine. And here's information about my book. So you're showing that you've done your research, which is good. You're showing that you know who that agent is and what they represent, and you're giving a comp title that they probably are not going to have a negative experience with. So if you can do that, you're kind of golden.
That's a great workaround, actually. I like that one a lot.
And if you're querying a whole bunch of agents, maybe get Kindle Unlimited, and you can
Yeah, just like go to town.
Yeah, we should tell them to put that in their marketing strategy, Kindle.
I think also too, like, if there's specific books you want to mention, but you're not quite sure of, like, you know, like Chantelle said, how they're going to react to that specific book. I'd say you could also just reference authors in general rather than pinpointing specific books. Like, readers of Stephen King, I mean, maybe be a bit more niche about it, would enjoy this book, because that then gives a tone and, you know, it's a bit more broad, but it might be a safe bet too.
Especially if that author has a certain kind of style, you know, that seems similar to your writing style.
Am I still?
You're good, Peter.
Now.
It happens every time he puts his hands up.
Me, yeah. Okay. Well, so somebody asked a question when they're querying, like, so say they were published before and by one of the big five, but the sales were less than hoped for. Do they put that in their query? And if they put that in their query, are the agents going to go look up how much their book sold?
They're going to look them up anyway.
Right.
So you may as well be like, I've already been published. You don't have to say, you know, the sales were less than stellar. But no matter, you know, it can be a negative, clearly, but also it's a positive, because it tells me that you can work with an editor, you can work to a deadline, you know how this works. It's not going to be, you know, something where it's going to be a tremendous amount of hand holding and, you know, you might break deadlines. Like, knowing that you're a professional is definitely a help. And there's no real point in hiding it, because honestly, I mean, even I look people up. I can't tell you the number of lies I've caught in query letters. It's really not a great place to lie. Yeah, so, you know, just be upfront about that sort of thing and go from there.
So, Peter, you were going to say something. I can't remember which question we were on.
It was about the comp titles.
The comp titles?
I remember this time. Yeah.
Oh no.
I was going to say.
Type it in the chat.
Well, you know what? If he pauses video, maybe we can hear him.
Oh yeah, Peter, maybe turn your video off, and that would help the bandwidth.
Yeah.
And you will get your audio. He turned it off.
I see that.
Okay, so while we're waiting, somebody was asking about they write screenplays and now they're writing their first novel and they're considering using a pen name. Thoughts about pen names, and would you query with your real name and then mention the pen name? Because if you queried with the pen name, there's nothing to stalk.
And is Amanda Michael her real name? So that's my question. Sorry.
You know, it's funny because I just taught a pitching class this weekend that we went through a query letter that was by somebody using a pen name. And for personally, my preference is to send the query letter as your real name. And then like at the end, after your signature, be like writing as pen name. Because we want to look up the real you, and your credentials might be under Peter's back, might be under your real name as opposed to your pen name. So, you know, clarifying that for us. And I think pen names are fine, but the only time, if you already have credentials under your primary name, let's say, I think that the only time having a secondary pen name is an advantage is if, let's say, you have written a lot of like middle grade and YA to great success, and your next book is like erotica. And
you don't want the children reading that.
It will not be your same fan base. Whereas, you know, if you wrote, and I have a bunch of authors under my imprint that this has kind of been a similar thing to, where it's like, oh, you know, I've written a bunch of fantasy or sci-fi, and this is my first mystery. Sylvia Moreno Garcia, actually, we published her first mystery, and she's known more for like urban fantasy, paranormal, mythological books. And we didn't consider using a pen name because it just translated over, you know, her readership. It wasn't that different where it would be something that it would offend her existing readership. We could just draw from it. So I really never recommend doing that unless there's an actual reason to do so. Or I've had this happen where, you know, somebody has a job that is prohibitive of publishing something and they need to do it under a pen name. So, you know, unless it's an extreme situation like that, I don't recommend it.
Let's see.
I thought this one, Jeannie right here, is something that I think is probably a really important component of the query, is specifically in the first paragraph, should we also mention why we're querying that agent specifically, you know, why we're seeking, you know, your representation specifically.
Well, I think that goes back to the, you know, hey, if you can figure out somebody else, like your comp title thing, like you know, you represent X person and Y person, and I would just be, you know, thrilled to be considered in the same breath as them. And, you know, hopefully you'd like to read this, or, you know,
you feel like that elevates the query, like to
it
the
really
agent
does.
specifically.
I think because I certainly notice, like, even when, because I get, I don't require agented queries, but the ones that I do get from agents or from just in general, where something else that I've done is referenced, or we saw you published X, Y, and Z, and we think that this goes along with that, I go, oh, okay, so you actually know the stuff that I put out, and you might be more likely to match with me that way. As opposed to kind of a cold query where I just feel like I'm one of 10, 20, 1,000 other people that might be doing query.
Right.
The one asterisk I would say to that is, if you are going to do that, and I think you should, make sure it's brief, make sure it's like a sentence or two, and that's it.
And also,
don't be a creeper.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good place to also drop, like, I saw you at the Symposium workshop and you mentioned you like XY, or, you know, I attended your workshop at whatever conference. Like, if there was some place where you met or you saw that agent or editor, that's a good place to drop that into.
Or like one of their
like,
authors referred you or something.
Yeah. But don't say like,
You were wearing a red scarf.
Yeah.
How about you every Thursday night doing your laundry in the laundromat?
I saw you walking back to your house one night.
Yeah.
And then I stayed outside and kept watching. Yeah.
In fact, I'm outside right now.
Oh, man.
Okay, so now I want to ask Peter a question since he's back. There's somebody who is concerned about, entering their work into contests and whether their ideas would be in jeopardy of being stolen or whatever, like putting their work out in that way. Can you perhaps shed some light and reassurance?
I promise you, if you submit to a reputable contest, they're not going to steal your idea. I promise. I promise. It is not a contest's MO to take ideas from an entrant. They are judging entries to determine the best thing. You do not need to worry about that. I promise.
Awesome. That was there's a long question right there.
I'm reading it right now, Jeannie.
It's a case study, actually. I like if you want to read it out, Jeannie.
Okay, I'll read it. I started querying my, because case studies are fun. And
I was right in the middle of it. So we're on the same page.
I started querying my novel manuscript nearly 1.5 years ago. I received 4 full requests from top agents relatively soon. Yes, fast forward to now, and these agents have been sitting on my fulls for wait, it shifted. Where did it go? Hold on.
Oh, that's when questions get answered. My bad.
Okay.
Bless
you.
And then they were like daring to consult Query Tracker. The following number of months, 15, 15, 14, and 12. Followed up at, and then they followed up at 6 months. Crickets. I know traditional publishing is slow, but I'm confident I'm being ghosted at this point. Each potential agent had asked upon request if other agents were reading it. I responded yes. I've since heard most top agents will only read your manuscript once you notify them with an offer of representation, giving them 2 weeks to read. That only then will they devote time and energy to your manuscript. If this scenario is true, it means none of them will ever read it. What a frustrating catch-22. What could I have done differently? Lie about other agents reading, reasons for hope, advice, and yes, I've moved on to other projects.
Well, never lie. I mean, that's just rule number 1. Never lie. But 2, I haven't heard that 2-week thing. I don't know if that's
I have.
Thing. Have you? Okay.
So it's yes and no. I'm agreeing with both of you because there were kind of 2 parts of that where if somebody else has offered representation, you can go back to that agent and be like, hey, I've gotten an offer, if you want to hurry up and read this, that's great. Otherwise, I'm probably going to sign. So that's where the 2 weeks came in, even though it's probably not like a rule of 2 weeks. I think the larger misconception there is the fact that they said that when they ask if other agents were reading it, that they won't read it unless there's an offer of representation. And I think that's where the fallacy is. That's really not a thing. The yes, we'll hurry up. And I mean, I'll even do it as a publisher. Like if I get, and this actually happened with the book that I just acquired on Monday, where it had been on my pile, my TBR pile, and I'd started it and then life happened and I was delayed in finishing it. And so when I got an email that said, oh, there's another offer of publishing, do you want us to just take it or do you want to hurry and finish reading? I went, no, I actually was really enjoying that. Let me hurry and finish reading. So that part of that is true, but that's not the only reason that an agent or editor would read something.
Okay. In a query bio, this person is also a screenwriter. Should they avoid mentioning, like, should they avoid saying that they're a produced screenwriter if the scripts that they have written are in a different genre and than their books?
No, any writing credit is a writing credit. If it's nonfiction, it's a writing credit. If you worked, as a journalist, it's a writing credit. It tells me that you probably work with editors, you know how to write to a deadline. A writing credit is a writing credit. It doesn't matter what genre it is.
What if you're published in an online magazine?
I'd still include that sort of, if it's not Joe's Basement Newsletter, and it's a magazine that we might have heard of, or has some
Pipeline Artist by chance.
There you go.
There you go.
Perfect example.
A
So-
wonderful literary magazine.
Oh, wonderful, yes.
Send your ideas to Jeannie.
That's right, Jeannie. Yes. We're doing a good job getting through our questions. What comes first, landing an agent or a publisher? I mean, Ciara went the agent, but then went the publisher without the agent. So
I'm weird though. I'm kind of backwards.
Can you speak to that process though, Ciara? I mean, I would love to, yeah, I mean, what's the difference?
I think typically you'd want to get an agent first because they're the ones who have the relationships, especially if you want to be traditionally published, especially in one of the larger publishing companies. They're the ones who have their foot in the door there and have the relationships there and can connect authors with publishers. So that's kind of the traditional route to go. There are publishers that don't require for you to have an agent to submit. There are publishers that you need an agent to even submit to them, but some smaller publishers or independent publishers, they'll take queries directly from authors. And if they like them, you don't need an agent. That's what happened to me. So it basically depends on what avenue you want to take to get your book published.
Well, and also let me jump in on that with the fact that most of the larger publishing houses, yes, you're right, do require agenting, but there are a couple of, have you noticed I do workarounds? So there are a couple of workarounds. One being like, for example, I think Tor and Nightfire do like one open query every like 6 months or so. And so if you hit in the window and if you like follow them on Twitter, they'll let you know when it's coming up. But also, again, conferences like Writer's Digest or ITW, or, I can list a bunch of them. Tor was taking queries at League of Utah Writers Conference in August. So those are scenarios where you can pitch directly to a publisher that normally requires an agent, but do it without an agent. And then I highly recommend, if they say, please send me your full manuscript or whatever, you turn around and you go to whichever was your top, agent on your list and go, I just got a request for a full from Tor, from, pick your publisher. And then you will likely get representation, because although I think that there's a lot of routes into a publisher, I don't think that you should ever sign a contract without having it looked over by a reputable agent.
Sure.
So, even if you do it the opposite way, you can still, I still recommend having an agent before you put your name on the dotted line.
And
Ciara, you
contests.
had something to add to that?
Can you guys see me? I keep
Yep.
freezing.
Yep.
Yeah, your hand, I saw
Okay.
the hand raised over there. So yeah.
Frozen like this. Yes, I mean, ditto to everything that just said. I will say though, I mean, as I have contacts in all the big 5 houses and multiple independent presses and whatnot. So if you place in a well-known contest, that can be kind of a workaround, like Chantelle said. But even then, I mean, I would still leverage, like if I got an offer for an unpublished author from a publisher, I would take that to an agent that
Absolutely.
interest in that person and leverage it to try and get them an offer representation so they could help negotiate the contract for that author. So yeah.
Okay, so somebody said an editor loved everything about my book, but had to pass because he just acquired something in a similar vein. He told my agent, and then there was a typo, so I'm not quite sure what he told the agent.
I think just send it to him again.
Maybe. Is there any way to approach him down the line if nothing comes through for my current submission, or is this a big no-no?
I mean, personally, I'd circle back. I mean, clearly I don't take no for an answer based on every single thing
I love
I've said
it.
tonight.
Yeah, that's great.
I mean, as long as you're respectful of other people's time and not demanding, I very rarely is a no completely a no. So, and if they liked it once, they're going to like it again down the road, likely. And especially if you've done something to, update it, make it a little different, circle back and be like, you liked this back then, but it was, a little too similar to something you had out. I've since gone back and updated it. And, I'd love you to look at it again and realize that you can actually probably do it sooner rather than later, because publishing schedules, especially for like a big 5, are a lot longer down the road. Like, major publishers are acquiring now for like 2024 and beyond, you know? So even if they took it today and had published something yesterday that was just like it, there's going to be enough room between those two things. And especially with a major publisher, if one thing worked well for them, they want more things that fit that particular box. So absolutely circle back.
Okay, good.
And also a cheeky trick, like a workaround, I'm taking Chantelle's verbiage here. If you change the title,
yeah,
it could be a new submission in their eyes. I mean, that's like, you know, just something to think about.
Yeah, but you also don't want to lose the cachet if they liked it last time.
True.
You want to, yeah. So
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I also just put something in the chat that I just wanted, we've got about 9-10 minutes left. And I just want to say, if there's something that you heard us talk about that you want, that you weren't clear on, or you want some more information about, like link to, or whatever, just shoot us an email at symposium@pipelineartist.com, and we will look that up and include that in your follow-up email with a link to the recording. Synopsis. The dreaded synopsis.
well, like I said, it's just, you know, it's telling the story, and, you know, follow the basic act structure, but also make sure that you're actually telling the story. And it's not like John woke up, John went to the bathroom, you know, John was surprised when an alien walked through the door, John, you know, yes, you don't want it to be that like scene by scene, beat by beat. You want to actually tell the story. Figure out what the core action of each scene is, whether it's the emotional or the plot arc, and describe that rather than the exact details, because fact after fact after fact is going to equal very boring, even if it's the most active, engaging book ever. So make sure you're still telling the story.
That said,
go ahead.
No, Chantal, go ahead. Finish. Sorry.
Oh, so the other thing, one of the like tips that and tricks that I suggest is actually like call a friend or just record yourself, like pretend, you know, tell the story and record it while you're doing it. So you're not going to go into any of those weird side plots, and you're not going to name everybody. It's going to be like, okay, so this is about Joe, and here's Joe's cousin or Joe's wife. You're not going to, you know, name people, tell people where they're from. You're going to eliminate all of that backstory that's unnecessary in a synopsis if you're actually telling the story verbally to somebody else. So I suggest recording that, then transcribing it, and then making it pretty.
Also, everything she just said, I would also add giveaway spoilers. Do not.
Oh God, yes.
Give away everything. Do not hold anything back. In terms of like, if there's a twist ending, tell them what the twist ending is.
Please.
Yeah.
Well, because I think a lot of people get confused between, and they think that the query is the same thing as the synopsis. And in the query, it's supposed to be like the teaser, like you'd read on the back of a book, whereas the synopsis is supposed to be like the beginning, the middle, and end. This is how it unfolds. Right. And I know through the book pipeline workshop editing, a lot of writers, when they submit their synopsis, they just don't say how it resolves, which is probably one of the most important parts of the synopsis, because it usually shows how your protagonist transformed, and then which typically dictates what the story is about. And so I feel like if you leave that off, you're missing a huge opportunity to be like, and this is, boom, how my story all comes together. And it's wonderful and great.
That's a wonderful point, because I get a lot. It's one of my pet peeves where I get like well, if you want to know how it ends, you'll just have to read the book. And I'm like, no, actually, I don't have to read the book. I can just say no right now and never have to read the book. So I think that was a really, a really good differentiator kind of between what I called earlier the mini synopsis that's in the query letter and the full synopsis, because to me, the mini synopsis is kind of the back of the book. It's what you're trying to engage and get the agent or editor to, you know, want to read more. The synopsis is the full thing, and you want to give everything away. And I know that we have several people who have dealt with Hollywood here in this chat. And if nothing else taught me anything, it was the importance of the ending, because you could have a film that audiences loved, like they couldn't wait to see it again. They were going to buy it and they were going to tell their family to come see it. And it would be, you know, 90 minutes of the most enjoyable thing ever in the history of the world to them. And then that last, 2 to 5 minutes was slightly unsatisfying. And that leaving audience would be like, that was the worst movie I've ever seen. I will tell everyone not to enjoy it. And the only real creative arts where that happens are film and manuscripts, novels. It's not like I go to a restaurant and I have a great meal and the dessert is kind of not great. And so like I throw it on the ground and flip the table and I'm like, I will never come to this restaurant again. I'll go back and probably just order a different dessert. But, for readers and viewers, that ending has to be satisfying. And so an agent or an editor needs to know that you stuck the landing.
And like I read a book recently by an author, New York Times author, huge author, tons and tons of books. And the ending, I would have flipped a table. It was terrible. It was like, it felt like he was, buzzing along perfectly fine. Everything was great. And then at the end, the protagonist wasn't even the one who resolved the conflict. Literally an Indian came out of the hedgerow with an arrow, a character I've never seen before. I'm like, where's this coming from? And it felt like his agent and publisher were probably like, okay, next book needs to get written right now. So wrap this thing up quickly so you can get onto your next book. It was terrible. And it makes me, even though this is a very famous author, makes me never want to read another one of his books again. I'll tell you later who it was. Somebody asked about if the National Writers Union is of assistance. I'm not quite
Like,
sure.
I've never heard of that.
Nope.
So.
I've never heard of it either. So I'm going to go with no.
But the Authors Guild is a wonderful resource.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
So that is of assistance.
Well, and honestly, if you belong to things like, for example, Horror Writers of America, like they set minimums and they do, all of these other things. So, these organizations are very helpful to writers as long as it's something that we've heard of.
Yeah. Has anybody have any sort of resource that they've come across that's really helps with marketing, like either a course that you've taken or some, like, I know I will just answer this question. Jane Friedman's website has a lot of really great information about the business side of being an author. I'm sure if you went on her site and typed in marketing, you'd find something. She's very reliable, excellent resource.
Yes.
Somebody asked, do you recommend, we're down to 3 questions. We've got 2 minutes. Let's see if we can do this. Do you recommend any publishers of children's picture books who don't require agents?
I'm out on that one.
Yeah, I don't.
Off
Not
the top of my head, no. I mean, off the top of my head.
But just
Sorry.
like look up the publishers, go to their websites because they might state on their website what their submission guidelines on, if you need to be agented to submit. So a lot of times you can find out those questions just by going and looking. Oh, somebody snuck another question in.
It's okay. I got it, Jeannie.
Okay. I believe each page of your story should have some kind of conflict going on. It can range from an all-out war and battle to the coffee maker not working right. Is this a good approach to get the reader to relate with a character and hook them in?
On every page.
Every single page.
I mean,
I think
should it
it's-
just be in mortal peril at the bottom of every? The coffee maker's on the fritz. Will they be electrocuted? Turn the page.
I think more importantly than conflict on every page is that whatever is happening in the page should relate to what the story's about or drive the story forward. If you have these random conflicts that have nothing to do with your story, just for the sake of building tension, it won't matter because it's not driving the story forward. You'll lose your momentum, you'll lose the reader, it'll become less engaging. So I would just recommend having everything having to do with like, what does your protagonist want? And how does that drive the story forward? And does the conflict integrate with that? So,
Or some sort of emotional resonance that's key to the character's journey. Yeah.
I think that was a brilliant answer, really, because I always like to say that if it's a really good book, You can turn to any chapter, and you might not know who every character is and what their relationship is, but you should be able to read that chapter, that page as kind of a microcosm of the whole, and it should kind of stand alone. And I think that goes exactly to what you just answered.
So any last parting advice from any of you that doesn't
Kill the
take
coffee pot.
more than 10 seconds?
That was great. Sorry, I loved that. That's like a t-shirt. Kill the coffee pot.
Kill the coffee pot. Yeah, that was awesome.
I have something that we can wrap up with.
Yes, please, Peter.
Be open to feedback on your work.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah.
We could do a whole 2 hours just on
Oh
feedback.
yeah.
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 No,
Which
I think my last parting words are just, do your research. Know the business that you're getting into enough to know when you need to ask a question.
I do have parting words. Chantelle is teaching a session for us in January about not just about like everybody thinks about getting your book launched. She is going to focus on your career, not just this one book, but like your whole writing career. So look for information on that coming up.
You keep thinking that I know what I'm talking about.
Yes, you do. Ciara, did you have any final parting thoughts?
I think it's really easy to get caught up in like what you should write for what audiences want, what agents want, what publishers want. But I think that just figure out what you love to write and what you enjoy and stick to that, because other people will like that too.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we just want to thank you guys so much. Ruth and I
Yes, thank
really,
you.
really excited that we're launching Symposium and that we had this publishing session. And next month, we're going to have one about filmmaking.
Hard truths
Truths about filmmaking.
Right.
And then we start launching into lots of different stuff coming up in 2022. So if you have ideas for any classes or sessions rather that you'd like us to address on topics, email us at symposium@pipelineartist.com.
Yeah.
Our inbox is, I'm going to regret saying that.
Maybe, but we want topic ideas from the people out there who want to hear about it. If you guys are going to be the ones taking the classes, we want to try to give you the content that you're looking for. And so please, fill up our inbox.
We are here for you. and you. All right. Well, good night, everybody. And
thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. It was great.
Bye.
Great.